All right, Minda Harts, welcome to Persistence Playbook.
Hey, Brett, happy to be here.
I'm excited, very excited for this one, Minda. And I just love your work recently on trust and trust specifically pertaining to the workplace. And I just think it's a really relevant issue for everybody listening, all entrepreneurs, even if they're just leading themselves. Trust is incredibly important because everyone that has a company, even if they're only solopreneurs, they aim one day to build that out and to have employees and to be delegating. And such an important piece of leadership, effective leadership, scaling a business is having a team full of people that actually trust you. And that's kind of what I want to center today's conversation around is how do we build that trust in the workplace? So I guess I'll start here. You know, why is trust so important in today's modern workplace?
Yeah, I mean, trust is so important, Brett, because we want trust in our romantic relationships. We want them in our platonic. And it's like, why wouldn't we want it at a place that we might spend 90,000 hours of our lifetime at? And that's really sobering when you think about it. But I think we don't look at trust in the same way as we do outside of the workplace. And the reality is, all the stats say that right now, what's top of mind for every employee, every leader is the lack of trust. And I think that's something we can solve for because trust has to be both a noun and a verb. And trust is a global language. We all want trust, right? If you're in Japan or you're in North Dakota, we all know what it feels like when we don't have it, and we know what it feels like when we do.
Boy, 90,000 hours. That's a lot of hours. I never did the math on that one. Holy cow. Definitely would like to have some trust in that environment if I'm spending almost
Just a
100K
pinch,
hours.
right?
Just just a little bit. I guess let's start with what leaders do wrong, right? How are leaders today kind of breaking that trust? And what do you see out there as far as the way things are being done in a negative fashion?
Yeah, I don't think that anybody shows up in their day to day and says, "Who can I erode trust with today?" Right? I don't think
Right.
we're that cynical, but I think we're doing things throughout the day because we're just trying to keep the ship moving. That we don't think about how our decisions have an impact, and that impact is either going to enhance trust with the people that work with us or erode it. Right? And when you break it down that to that lowest common denominator, you're like, oh, okay, so how I might be micromanaging. I'm not trying to erode trust with my colleagues or my direct reports, but if I'm hovering or, I don't see the green light on the teams, and I'm freaking out, or somebody doesn't have their camera on, instead of jumping to the worst conclusion that they're on the beach working in Tahiti, maybe something's going on with a, with the spouse or a partner or a child. Let me take things into consideration. And I think right now we just like jump to the worst conclusions, and we don't have trust in one another. And I think that shows with leadership, and also to return to work, the lack of transparency around some of these conversations, I think just leaves a lot of employees with ambiguity and wondering if they belong here anymore and if they have a future at the company.
Are trust falls still a thing? Do they work?
There's still a thing, but nobody's really catching anybody these days, right?
Yeah,
So.
I've never done a trust fall. I've only seen them done on like TV and commercials. I've never really seen one done in person. I always thought that'd be kind of fun just to fall backwards into a bunch of people. I did go crowd surfing once at a Rage
Okay.
Against the Machine concert, so I think that's kind of like a trust fall on a massive scale where you're just trusting thousands of drunk people to not drop you.
Yeah, that's a huge trust activity.
But that's probably what a lot of modern employees feel like, right? That's the amount of trust they feel. Not much. They feel like the ground could, give out from them at any moment, and somebody could drop them on their heads. So, I want to kind of run down the list, right? Because you've got the seven trust languages, which is a framework that you created, which would you define as the essential way that leaders can build and maintain trust in the workplace. So, straight from the top, I know transparency, right, is one of those key pillars, and of course, transparency being, open and honest in our communication. Like, why is transparency, first of all, so important in the modern workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think that many of us, especially if you're of a certain age, as leaders, we say, well, you can't tell everybody everything. And that's true, but you can provide a little clarity, you can provide a little honesty. And I think in today's workplace with, again, hybrid work environment, AI, evolving, there's a lot of ambiguity about the future of work for a lot of people. And if we don't tell people, you know what, yes, AI is here, but we're working to make sure that you can still have a place here, that'll ease my concerns. Or, you know what, I don't know what the schedule is going to be next week, but as I learn more, I'll let you know, right? That's going to allow people to put their guards down a little bit and want to work with a little more productivity, because if I'm anxious all day, that's going to impact my productivity. So I think transparency is saying what you can, but also saying when you don't have the answers. And I think we work in a working world right now where we don't have all the answers. And I think employees want to us to tell them that, right? Have that vulnerability. And I think that goes a long way in terms of the trust.
Yeah. I think that last one you hit on there is huge, right? Like as leaders, we might not always have the answers at that time of whatever the question is, and but it's okay to say that. Like I don't have the answer to this right now, but when I do have the answer, I'm going to bring it to you. And I think just communicating that can really mean the world to a teammate or an employee.
Absolutely. I mean, because what we're saying is that you're not a human first, right? And so we
Right.
all need that.
Right. So kind of moving down the list here, the seven trust languages. Now, I just want to touch on each one of these because I just think they're all really important to the modern leader. Is security, right? Now, and I'm assuming security just kind of means like creating that psychological safety, so that people feel protected and valued. And let me know if I'm wrong there, but how do we really, nuts and bolts put that into action?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because security, yeah, it's that psychological safety, but it's also the emotional and intellectual safety. So if I say my big idea in a meeting, Brett, do you run off with it next week and say it was yours? Like I feel safe enough to tell my idea. And I think that
Sure.
we need to create that environment to where colleagues trust colleagues, right? And so I think we can create that by role modeling that, and leaders can help usher that in.
So I guess like if I'm a leader and it's Sunday night and I'm thinking for my plan for the week, like what are like one or two just like tactical things I can do to start creating that psychological safety?
Yeah, I think part of it is, so we're talking about the trust languages, and you might find that you have a primary, secondary, and tertiary. And I don't
Hmm.
expect all leaders will do all seven of these things. But let's say, for example, the psychological safety. If you know that last Friday, 30 people from the team were laid off, and you're coming into Monday knowing that if you were your employees, how would you feel? Right. So coming into that Monday meeting and saying, hey, I know that some of your peers aren't here anymore, but I want to let you know that, we value you. You have a place
Sure.
on this team. That's going to settle the room a little bit, right? Because we're addressing the elephant in the room, because we're not saying there's smoke from the chimney and there's nothing to see here, right? We're providing some safety there. Or if an idea was kind of co-opted unintentionally in a meeting and you knew that, then just saying, hey, I want to give some props to Minda because she shared something last week, and I just wanted to acknowledge that she mentioned that, a couple weeks ago, and we kind of skimmed over that, but I wanted to bring that back to the table. That's going to then show that we don't just pass along people's information, that intellectual property is important here. And so there's so many ways, and it really comes down to one that we'll talk about too, is that acknowledgement, right? Just providing people that safety rails in the workplace goes a long way.
Sure, and I totally agree. I think that at the end of the day, humans innately want to be seen and they want to be appreciated. And I think if we're hitting on both of those on a regular basis, then people are going to feel safe in their work environment. They're going to feel safe bringing their ideas to the meeting table. They're going to feel motivated to bring their best to work every single day. But if we're not offering appreciation, we're not pointing out the good things that the people are doing, that then they're just not going to feel as motivated as they can. They're going to feel underappreciated, and who could blame them for looking at other work or greener pastures? And you wonder why, why Martha keeps taking LinkedIn meetings, 3 or 4 a day, because you haven't appreciated anything she's done specifically in years, and that's just how human beings work. We need to be seen. We need to be appreciated.
Absolutely.
So I think that we can kind of segue into, and there's a couple more that we're going to touch on all of them, but we have kind of segued into acknowledgement and recognizing the contributions and giving credit, where it's due. Like what are like one or two ways that leaders can effectively make sure they're doing this on a regular basis?
Yeah, I think this is so important because right now, the climate's kind of a little wild and everybody can't get a bonus like they might have last year or previous
Right.
years or a promotion. So saying to you, hey, Brett, thank you for the research that you did on this project. We wouldn't have been able to close out that client without you. That's going to say, hey, they actually do value my work, right? That acknowledgement is
Sure.
awesome. Or listen, we can't do a raise this year, but want to give you some extra PTO days, right? How does that sound? Or maybe for the next month, why don't you work from home? There's certain things that we can do to acknowledge people. And then that could be a simple email, right? I bet people are watching us or listening to us right now, and you could shoot out someone on your team right now. Hey, I just want to acknowledge what you did last week or what you said. That idea in the meeting really got me thinking. Thanks. Really value your voice and glad you're on the team. It's free, Brett.
Right.
A job well done. And we all want to be seen and valued for our work. And that keeps us being even more productive. They say when trust is present, we are 21% more productive. And I know if my manager or my colleagues say, hey, love that you did X, Y, and Z, that's going to make me feel good. And it's going to make me keep showing up, right? And trusting the relationship that you value my work.
And I just think the specificity of the compliments and the praise is really what hits home. Like you could tell your marketing team, hey, you guys did a great job on the newsletter this week, and they'll feel good for a second, and then they'll forget about that and they'll move on to the next thing. But if you took the time to actually state what was great about the newsletter, like, hey, I loved how you guys put that joke of the week in this week's newsletter. I think that's really going to resonate with people. Just that little extra 10% where you take the time to vocalize specifically what that person added to the team just really makes that appreciation hit home in a completely different way.
It does. And we all need that a little bit more these days.
So I want to move on to demonstration, right? Showing through actions, not just words. That's just kind of how you show your people that you mean what you say. How can leaders just get more effective at the act of demonstration towards building trust?
Yeah, the demonstration is the action. If we say that we love to promote from within, but our last 5 hires have been outside hires, that's not demonstrating that is true. Right? So what we can do is acknowledge that we haven't been doing that, and then say, hey, here's our plan to show you that we value everybody here, and we want to make sure everybody has an upward mobility here. And that's the show and the tell, right? That they're both, what I say aligns with what we said our values are. And I think that that's something that when we do fall short, that's when we acknowledge it and then we course correct.
Sure, right. Back up what you say. You could be a leader in a boardroom. You could just be a friend. You could be a family member. At the end of the day, if we can say we're going to do something, say we're going to be somewhere, and then consistently actually act on those words, then people are going to trust us. They're going to know that what we say is true and that they can depend on it. And on the flip side, if we don't, and we only have to do this a few times. I feel like it's a lot tougher to build trust than it is to break trust, right? You only have to tell someone you're going to do something and not do it once or twice before they really start to lack trust in you. And I think we have to realize that it's a very fragile thing, trust. And if we screw it up once or twice, it's going to take a lot more time to build it back up than it did to break it.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about feedback, right? Offering constructive, consistent input. It just helps people grow. But I think a lot of leaders, especially new or emerging leaders, really struggle with this one, right? Giving constructive feedback. So, how can leaders in today's modern workplace institute positive feedback systems?
Yeah, this is so key because a lot of research shows that even some male managers have a hard time giving their female counterparts feedback, and we all want to grow at work, so we're actually doing a disservice when we don't provide meaningful and consistent insight. And I think part of the piece that we want to be so careful on is making sure we have a feedback loop. And is this feedback going to enhance trust with you or erode trust, right? Because they say feedback is a gift, Brett, but we've all received a gift that we didn't want, right? So making sure that that's going to enhance the relationship, that is adding value it's adding new information, right? And then allowing people to respond to what you've said. Because I think in the workplace where it gets murky is if you're the leader or the manager, then your feedback, it's one way, right? There's no feedback loop. And I think that this is a way that we have constructive conversations, and we allow people to process the information that's been given to them and then respond to what has been said.
Is that true that most male leaders struggle to give constructive feedback to female employees specifically?
That is true. Gallup and Edelman's Trust Barometer have some data points on that, and it's that they don't want to say the wrong thing, or they don't want to be perceived as mean. And so when we don't give that feedback to everyone on the team, then they're missing out on opportunities for growth. And so I think that this is a tool that every one of us should work on, because we all want to know, hey, are we hitting the mark, or could there be some things that we could be improving on? And I think we have to do that very democratically, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess I can understand that then, right? As a guy, maybe an emerging, a new leader, not wanting to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I guess I can understand that. But just on a whole, I think that just getting constructive feedback is one of the fastest avenues for growth. And if you're a leader, it is absolutely part of your job description to be giving people constructive feedback.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about like even just growing up, if you had one or two friends who would give you constructive feedback in like a gentle but honest way, then they're as valuable as gold. I mean, those people are tough to find. Someone that'll look you in the eyes and tell you, listen, like, I love you, but what you're doing here is probably not the best way to get there. I know for me, I've got, honestly, probably only one friend I think that's comfortable giving me honest, constructive feedback. And he's probably my best friend for it. I think it's such a valuable tool to get comfortable with, but it is something that I think just makes people a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning.
Yeah, because even as leaders and managers, not wanting to give even peer feedback is sometimes it comes across as criticism. And I think
Right.
that's why it's really careful that, okay, is this going to enhance or erode? And if we craft it in a proper way, I think that people can receive it with an open mind.
So I guess how do we craft, like, what if someone's really screwing up, like they're just not doing something well? How can we craft that verbiage in a way that of course tells them they're not doing it right, but also delivers it in like a gentle, constructive manner that in the end helps them be better?
Yeah, I think this is really key. And so one of the things that I would encourage people to do is first, if you're able, it's not always the case, but build relationships with people so that when you do have to give some, jarring feedback or something, that it doesn't come as a shock or a surprise, right? You never talk to them, then all of a sudden, you have something, criticizing their work. But I would also ask, hey, I noticed that you haven't been attending the last 5 Zoom bingos, and you used to come. I just wanted to touch base. How's everything going? Right? Or I noticed that you used to send the newsletter out on Tuesdays at noon, and I noticed that they've not been making it to my inbox till Friday at 3 p.m. And I just wanted to check in. Is there something that you need more support on? Is there something you want to discuss with me? I would love to find out more about what's going on. And I think approaching it with that empathy, right? With that sensitivity to find out first the information, but instead of going in like, I don't know what's going on with you. Are you working anymore? It's Tuesday at 12 and I'm not getting them till Friday. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I think it's, again, all of us probably heard growing up, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I think
Sure.
if we approach it, again, is trust. Do we want trust to still be part of this conversation at the end of it? And we can still deliver, tough news or hard conversations and still keep someone's dignity and humanity intact.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it, right? Don't just come for the throat. Say, hey, listen, I noticed this is not going the way that it should. What's going on? Like, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to assist you? In this project. And even before that, I love what you said about, just building relationships with people, right? If you've taken the time to build that relationship and you've asked them questions that were not related to work, had your son's baseball game go this weekend, or what'd you do over Thanksgiving break? Just asking these little questions over the course of the year and being genuinely interested in people and then really listening to them is going to make them so much more receptive to your constructive criticism when you actually have to give it.
Bingo, 1,000%.
So I want to move down the list here a little bit, and I think we're on trust language Number six, and sensitivity is what we're going to talk about. And of course, the importance of just leading with empathy and awareness of others' experiences. Probably a trust language that maybe you wouldn't have mentioned 30 years ago. I don't know how many bosses were walking into the workplace concerned about sensitivity, but today I think it is incredibly important. And how can leaders be more effectively sensitive to their employees' needs in today's modern workplace?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We wouldn't have been talking about it. It's like just do your job and cry at home later, right?
Right.
But sensitivity is being mindful of our words and our impact and our behavior. So,
Mhm.
for example, people will say to me, I'll be doing a workshop and some leaders will say, I don't watch the news anymore. And I push back on that and I say, I understand that the news can be a little daunting, but I would encourage you as a leader, as a peer, to do keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on, because you have people you work with, right, that might be impacted by certain things taking place. And you don't want to come in that day and tell that joke, right? Or if you have
Right.
somebody who is experiencing an earthquake, in California and you live in New York, knowing that I live there, you're not going to say, let's do that annual review right now. You're going to say, you know what, Minda, I know you're going through a thing right now. There's an earthquake. Are you okay? Let's table this year in review until, things are a little more stable there in California. That's being sensitive. That's being mindful about what's going on, even though you don't live in California. And so I think we can just be more mindful. The jokes that we might have told 10 years ago are probably not appropriate today, right? And so, yes, we didn't mean any harm, but thinking about, okay, is this joke going to enhance trust in the room or erode trust, or whatever that decision is? And I think we can be more empathetic and sympathize with people, even if they may walk a different line than we do. I think it's important for us to just realize that the humanity that we want to bring each and every day builds that trust.
And I think what you said there is pretty interesting, because I don't think I ever really thought of that. But I think when you are a leader, there is kind of just like a baseline amount of knowledge that you have to have about what's going on in the world. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can't be one of those people that just never watches the news, because you know what? The people on your team are probably watching the news, right? And if something happens out there that is going to be potentially affect one of your employees' emotions in a way, you need to be sensitive to that. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty interesting, because I know as someone who I don't really enjoy the news, but I do honestly see the importance in just having a baseline amount of knowledge about what's going on in current events, just because you need to be able to talk about it with your team members. And if they want to talk about it, you have to have something to add.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty interesting point. Well, one that I honestly had never heard before, but I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree with.
Thank you.
So I want to work at one more down the list. And we touched on this one a little bit before, but it's just the art of follow through, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think of course, doing what you said you would do reliably, consistently. How can leaders get better at follow through?
Yeah, this is important because we talked about demonstration earlier, Brett, and demonstration is the action, right? But follow through is the consistency. So, did I do it the one time? I kept my word, but now I have this history of not doing what I say I'm going to do, right? I think we've all said, yeah, I'll make that introduction for you. And then life happens, life is lifing, and then we forget, right? And so now the next time I say that to you, oh, yeah, I'll make that introduction, you're going to be like, you've been trying to make introductions for like
Right.
5 years.
I'll believe it when I see it. I'll
Right,
believe it when I
right.
see it,
So
Minda.
it's keeping our word in the workplace, right? It's if you said you're going to talk about the promotion in 3 months and then now it's been 3 years, it's also circling back when you're not able to do that. So, for example, if I'm someone in the workplace that loves to say yes to everybody because I want to try to get this done, but I have so much
Right.
on my plate, so I'm missing all kinds of deadlines, also going back to you and saying, hey, I thought that I could help you with this, but I'm not going to make that deadline. I'm probably going to need to bring this back to your plate. I apologize. That's also closing the circle and closing the gap so that people can still trust you again, right? Because you're not just leaving people hanging. And I think follow through isn't just always saying yes and doing the thing, it's also admitting when you're not able to complete the task. And that's also following through.
But it's about closing that loop, right?
Yep.
If if you leave that loop open and you make a promise and then you just never come back to it, then people really lose their trust in you. They lose in their faith to trust in your word. And I think that whenever you make a promise to someone, whether it's in work or otherwise, just write it down somewhere. Put it in a reminder app, put it in a to do list app, put it in Asana, whatever your personal productivity tool is. so that you don't forget about it, right? And
Yeah.
so that, maybe if a week down the road you promised you were going to write somebody a reference letter and you just have been slammed and you haven't been able to do it, at least you remember to reach out to that person and say, hey, listen, it's still on my mind. I'm going to get it to you. Do you mind if I get it to you by the end of the month? I know I said I would get it to you by last week, and I apologize. I'm still going to get it done. Got to close that loop. You have to close loops with people because they're going to remember. That loop's going to stay open on their end. Even if you've completely forgotten about it, that loop's staying open on their end. So I think just when you make any type of commitment or promise, make sure to write it down, put it in your phone somewhere so that you don't forget about it and so that you can fulfill on that promise at some point in the future.
Absolutely, because we all know how that feels when people don't close the loop. Like, so let's try not to be that person too.
Right. Let's not be that person, guys. Nobody wants that. So I want to drill this a little bit more into just, creating those important relationships at work. Because I think leaders struggle with this sometimes. They
Yeah.
go in and they're like, I'm the leader, I'm the boss. Of course, I want my people to like me, but I also want them to respect me. Like, how close should I really be getting with my employees? Like, how do leaders toe that line?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to remind people that trust is a two-way street. And I think sometimes leaders, to your point, show up in the room or show up on the Zoom and they're like, I'm the leader, everybody trusts me, right? Not having demonstrated any type of trust. And I
Right.
think that trust has to be earned and we have to come back to that. And I think for leaders, you don't have to be someone's best friend, but are we centering humanity and dignity and respect in the workplace? And are we role modeling that? So when trust falls short, people feel safe enough to say, hey, I know you might not have meant this when you said it in the meeting, but I wanted to let you know how that impacted me, just so you're aware, right? We're creating that safety. We're creating that space where people get to give, have that safety to be able to talk about when trust falls short. And I think that's where we have an issue in the workplace. It's less of a trust issue and it's more of a communication crisis, right? That we're not able to communicate with each other. And now there's this expectation gap. Trust looks one way to you, Brett, and it looks one way to me, and we haven't really talked about what that looks like. And I think every leader today can ask their direct reports or colleagues, what do you need from me to do your best work while you're here? And you're going to find some remnants of one of those 7 languages that we talked about.
And just to kind of double up on something you said there, and I'm curious, how can we make our team members and our employees just feel more confident and more comfortable bringing their ideas to the forefront? I think a lot of people struggle with that. They have an idea in their heart, on their mind. They think it might be productive for the team, but they don't want to say it because they don't want to be made fun of or looked down on or whatever it is. How can we get our teams to be more confident and just feel more comfortable, bringing their ideas to the table?
Yeah, what we're asking everybody to do is be a little more like emotionally intelligent in the room. And so as leaders or as managers, let's think about it. Do people come to the meeting and give ideas freely, or is there only 1 or 2 people that do it, right? And we need to kind of interrogate that to say, what can I be doing to usher in a space where everybody feels confident to share what they're feeling or not? And if they don't want to do that, out loud, is there a mechanism for you to say, hey, if this isn't the space for you to share, I want you to feel like you can come to me and share it, right? But we're giving that space because there's always going to be 1 or 2 people who are going to dominate the conversation. And we also want to create that trust that just because you're not speaking, or maybe you're a little more introverted, that your voice isn't valued here or your ideas aren't valued. And so I think as a leader, we have to demonstrate what that looks like so that everybody feels like they're valued, even if we don't physically hear them talk all the time.
Yeah, and I think most meetings, there are 1 or 2 people that usually dominate the conversation. The extroverts in the room. And I think what you said there was really powerful. Was just as a leader, vocalize to the entire group, like, listen, if you have an idea and you don't want to say it here and you want to bring it to me one-on-one, like my door is open. I want to hear everyone's input. I think just vocalizing that will help the introverts to step into your office and actually tell you what's on their minds.
Absolutely. And we have to be the ones to bring that to the table, right? We can't leave trust in the car with us. We have to, put it on the table each and every time and allow people to do that. And again, for us to say that, because when a leader makes that declaration, that's going to signal to someone like myself, who isn't going to be the most talkative in the room, to say, okay, yeah, I do have some ideas. And on my next one-on-one, I'm going to feel safe enough to bring that to Brett,
No, 100%. And I've heard you talk about a terminology called like workplace trauma. And I'm just kind of curious, like, for one, I guess what would be defined as workplace trauma?
Yeah, I think when I first started talking about workplace trauma, I don't think I understood how trust was related to it like I do
Hmm.
now. And I think that trauma that we feel is when we don't feel safe, right? You have a manager, because let's be honest, some of us are in situations where the power dynamics are off, right? And the trust that you don't feel is from your manager. And you can't just go to your manager and say, hey, I don't trust you
Right.
anymore, you know? So a lot of that trauma, that if you have somebody who plays favorites, who doesn't see your value in the workplace and those sorts of things, that's traumatic, right? Because you've worked really hard to get to where you are, and now you have somebody who you feel, rather it's real or not, that's blocking you from moving forward, right? And so it's that feeling where you just, there's no resolution to the conflict, and so that can be traumatizing, right? Or if you're the youngest in the workplace and you feel like everybody just diminishes everything that you have to say, right? That's traumatic because you've worked really hard to get to this place. And I think that's where the trust has to be built, because even if I am a Gen Z, I should still feel like my voice is valued like a boomer, right? And vice versa. And I think that that can be traumatizing if we stigmatize certain, groups in the workplace, and they don't have a space to be able to talk about the things that are impacting them. And I like to say that two things can be true at the same time, Brett, that we could be working at the same place and still experience that workplace differently, right? So I think that's where trust really has to be an anchor.
Yeah, and I completely agree with all that. And you mentioned Gen Z there, and I'm curious. Um, what do they want from leadership that might be different from other generations?
Yeah, I was just doing some work with Indeed and their well-being report, and they were in the well-being report. They were saying that 74% of Gen Z don't trust the current workplace, and that's high, right? But
That
and I
is
think
high.
that's really high.
That's
And
really high.
but the more I thought about that, I'm like, and they're the generation that trusts the least, right? And if you guess that the boomers trust the most, and it made me think, what can we do to leverage each other in the workplace where we don't see each other as like fighting each other for bread, right? That we could
Right,
all
right.
just be able to come with our best work and be able to trust that you, just because I'm 20 something years old, that you don't value what I said. And oftentimes when I'm talking in front of groups, they'll be like, well, those Gen Zs are so entitled. And I said, well, if you were Gen Z and all anybody ever told you is that you're entitled and you didn't put your work in, what do you think that does to trust? How can we reframe the conversation, right? And I think that's what we need to do, is let's build trust with each other, every group, every demographic of age, instead of putting each other down, because there's something that we all need and we all are working together right now. So let's enhance trust versus erode it. And I think that Gen Z, if they seen their value a little bit more, that trust would go up a little bit more at least.
So I want to attack this conversation from the angle of retention versus recruitment, which is
Mm-hmm.
obviously, an important issue on any leader's minds. I think a lot of companies focus heavily on, recruiting diverse talent, but then they fail to retain them. So I'm kind of curious, like, what is one system or practice that companies should implement to build that true belonging that leads to long-term retention?
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that. And trust is connected to retention. And there's another study out that says $322 billion is lost on employee turnover. So think about
Sure.
that, right? And so we don't want to lose that much. So trust isn't just nice to have, it's good for the bottom line. And so with retention, I think the first 90 days, the onboarding process really has to be embedded with trust, right? Because I think that sometimes that can be a little murky in terms of transparency and just demonstration and feedback, and not really understanding what your place is there in the company. And I think that sets the tone for the employee journey. And so I think I would definitely focus on the onboarding process, because I think when people don't feel safe or valued or secure, and they don't understand kind of why certain policies are in place, then that doesn't help them as they continue on throughout their tenure in the workplace. And I think if we allow for that feedback loop early on, then we get to some of the erosions of trust, and keep people a little bit longer.
So to wrap things up here, if a leader's listening to this episode and they could do just one thing
Mhm.
tomorrow morning to make their team feel more seen, more valued, and included, what would you tell them to do?
I would say, have ask this one question: what do you need from me to do your best work while you're here? And that's going to open up the floodgates. And again, you're going to find out what people need, because oftentimes we show up and give trust based off what we need. But let's find out what our team needs from us. And if we find out that somebody needs a little more transparency, then consider, what's it look like for me to give a little more clarity than I did maybe a week ago, right? If somebody needs a little more feedback, what would it look like to, in our one-on-ones once a month to provide them that? That's going to create a better working relationship, and it's going to retain people. And I know that my best leaders that I worked for, when I trusted them, I would run across hot coals, right?
Sure.
Do efforts
For sure. Absolutely. I love that question, right? And it's an honest question. What do you need from me as a leader that will enable you, empower you to do your best work, right? And I think that's what we're all here as leaders to do, is to empower other people to bring their best work to the table. Minda, thank you so much for being with us today. This was a lot of fun.
Me too. Thank you.
But where can everyone keep up with what you got going on these days?
Follow me on LinkedIn at Minda Harts, or come chat with me at mindaharts.com.
There it is. Thank you so much, Minda, and Persistence Playbook Nation. Thank you for being with us. As always, this is your weekly reminder. You will feel resistance to the important work in your week. When you feel that resistance, lean into your why. Take action anyway. We'll catch you next one.